The empires of antiquity built monuments that still stand today, yet their economic systems crumbled beneath the weight of ambition, inflation, and overreach. From the Roman Forum to the ruins of Baghdad, these civilizations left behind stone and dust. But rarely did their wealth survive the dynasties that created it. When archaeologists sift through the remnants of Mesopotamian trade routes or excavate Roman villas, they find evidence of staggering prosperity and then sudden, inexplicable collapse. The question that haunts historians is not why these empires fell, but whether anyone truly learned from their failures. Today, a new aristocracy has emerged, one that does not wear togas or rule from marble palaces but commands wealth that exceeds the treasuries of most nations. These modern billionaires study the same historical patterns that once governed emperors and caliphs, and they have structured their fortunes to outlast not just their own lifetimes, but the next century of geopolitical upheaval, technological disruption, and economic chaos. They have created what can only be described as a 100-year plan, a systematic approach to legacy that mirrors the ambitions of ancient Rome while incorporating the tools of 21st century finance. This is not mythology or conspiracy theory but documented strategy, grounded in trusts, endowments, foundations, and investment structures designed to transcend the cyclical collapses that ended every empire before them. The Romans understood wealth as land and legacy, but they failed to account for the brittleness of centralized power and the corrosive effects of monetary debasement. The ultra-wealthy of our era have absorbed those lessons and built systems that deliberately avoid the pitfalls of imperial overreach. Stay with me until the end of this documentary to fully understand how these strategies work and what they mean for the future of wealth, power, and society itself. And let me know in the comments where you are watching from, your city and country. The Roman Empire at its height was an economic organism of extraordinary complexity, a machine that extracted grain from Egypt, wine from Gaul and silver from Hispania, funneling it all into the coffers of a patrician class whose estates rivaled the fiscal power of the Senate itself. Roman elites understood the principle of intergenerational wealth transfer long before modern estate law formalized it. They invested in vast agricultural holdings, vineyards, and urban real estate, passing these assets down through carefully arranged marriages and inheritance structures designed to consolidate power across generations. The Roman inheritance tax was a modest 5% for non-family transfers, a recognition that family continuity was the bedrock of social stability. Yet, even with this sophisticated understanding of dynastic planning, Rome's elites could not escape the structural vulnerabilities that would eventually tear the empire apart. By the 3rd century, currency debasement had become so severe that the government refused to accept its own money for tax payments, demanding instead payment in goods, effectively binding citizens to the land and their occupations in a rigid economic structure that accelerated the empire's collapse. This was not a failure of individual planning but a systemic flaw, the inability of even the wealthiest families to insulate themselves from the disintegration of the state itself. The lesson here is critical. Wealth preservation requires not just family strategy but an understanding of the broader economic and political ecosystem in which that wealth exists. The super-rich of Rome could not save themselves because their fortunes were inextricably linked to an empire that was eating itself from within. And this is a lesson that modern billionaires have taken deeply to heart. The Islamic Golden Age offers a contrasting model, one where wealth was not merely hoarded but actively deployed to create institutions that outlasted individual lifetimes and even dynasties. In Baghdad, during the 8th through 13th centuries, the caliphs and merchant aristocracy established waqfs, charitable endowments that funded hospitals, schools, libraries, and scientific academies. These were not philanthropic gestures in the modern sense, but calculated investments in social infrastructure that reinforced the legitimacy and influence of the donor families. A waqf could not be taxed, seized, or dissolved by the state, making it an ideal vehicle for preserving wealth across generations while simultaneously building a legacy of public benefit. The hospitals of the Islamic world were forbidden by law from turning away patients who could not pay, and they were sustained by these endowments long after the original donors had died. This represented a different philosophy of legacy, one that understood wealth not merely as capital to be preserved but as a tool for shaping civilization itself. The scholars of the House of Wisdom in Baghdad translated and preserved Greek, Persian, and Indian texts, creating a repository of knowledge that would eventually seed the European Renaissance. The merchant families who funded these efforts were not simply altruistic. They were securing their names in history and ensuring that their influence would persist even if their immediate descendants squandered the family fortune. This is a model that resonates deeply in contemporary American philanthropy, where foundations established by Carnegie, Rockefeller, and more recently Gates and Buffett serve dual purposes. They generate social good while perpetuating the influence and name recognition of the founding families across centuries. The collapse of the Spanish Empire in the 17th century provides another instructive case study, one that modern wealth strategists reference frequently when discussing the dangers of resource-based economies and inflationary spirals. Spain extracted vast quantities of gold and silver from the Americas, yet this influx of precious metals did not translate into lasting prosperity but rather triggered catastrophic inflation that undermined the real economy. The Spanish crown spent faster than it could extract, financing endless wars and lavish courts while the productive sectors of the economy withered. This is a pattern that repeats across history. Resource extraction without productive investment leads to hollowing out, a lesson that applies equally to oil-dependent petrostates and to individuals whose wealth is concentrated in illiquid, non-productive assets. The Spanish aristocracy, despite their access to unimaginable riches, saw their real purchasing power erode as inflation devoured the value of their holdings. This is why modern wealth management emphasizes diversification not just across asset classes but across geographies, currencies, and economic systems. The goal is to insulate wealth from the inevitable volatility of any single nation or economy, a strategy that would have been impossible in the age of empires but is now foundational to how the ultra-wealthy structure their holdings. The Rockefeller family represents perhaps the most successful American example of a 100-year plan executed with discipline and foresight. John D. Rockefeller, who built his fortune through Standard Oil in the late 19th century, established a series of irrevocable trusts in 1934 and 1952 that continue to manage family wealth today, nearly a century after their creation. These trusts were not merely legal instruments but governance structures that imposed rules on how wealth could be accessed, spent, and transferred. The Rockefellers created a family office, Rockefeller Financial Services, with 5 separate divisions managing investments, venture capital, insurance, and risk. They diversified aggressively, moving wealth out of oil and into real estate, bonds, and other assets to protect against the volatility of commodity markets. Critically, they also embedded philanthropy into the family culture, establishing foundations that supported education, medical research, and cultural institutions, ensuring that the Rockefeller name would be associated with public benefit rather than merely with wealth accumulation. This is not accidental but strategic. In a democratic society, concentrated wealth requires social legitimacy to endure, and philanthropy provides that legitimacy. The Rockefellers understood that wealth without purpose invites resentment and regulatory intervention, but wealth deployed for the common good secures political and social capital that protects the family's interests across generations. The trust structures they established also limited the ability of any individual heir to deplete the family fortune, a safeguard against the Vanderbilt curse, the well-documented tendency of dynastic wealth to evaporate within 3 generations. The Vanderbilt family, despite amassing a fortune comparable to the Rockefellers in the late 19th century, failed to establish similar governance structures and saw their wealth dissipate through lavish spending, poor investments, and lack of financial discipline among heirs. The American cultural context for these strategies is rooted in a particular understanding of individualism, stewardship, and long-term vision that distinguishes the United States from other wealthy nations. American individualism, particularly as it developed on the frontier, is characterized by a belief that effort and merit lead to upward mobility, and that wealth is a product of personal discipline and foresight, rather than luck or inheritance. This creates a cultural framework where long-term planning is not merely a financial strategy but a moral imperative, a demonstration of responsibility and vision. At the same time, American culture is deeply suspicious of hereditary aristocracy, which creates a tension that wealthy families must navigate carefully. The solution has been to frame dynastic wealth not as entitlement but as stewardship, with each generation expected to contribute to and grow the family's holdings rather than simply consume them. This is codified in structures like dynasty trusts, which legally require heirs to contribute to the trust rather than simply withdrawing funds, reinforcing a culture of financial responsibility. The result is a system where wealth is preserved, not through passive inheritance but through active engagement, with each generation trained in financial management, investment strategy, and philanthropic deployment of capital. This is a distinctly American approach to legacy, one that reconciles the democratic ideal of earned success with the practical reality of inherited advantage. Contemporary billionaires have access to tools and structures that were unimaginable even 50 years ago, and they are using them to build wealth preservation systems that dwarf the ambitions of Roman senators or Abbasid caliphs. The modern dynasty trust, for example, can be structured to last in perpetuity in certain jurisdictions, sheltering assets from estate taxes and creditors across unlimited generations. These trusts can hold not just financial assets but also family businesses, real estate, intellectual property, and even interests in venture capital funds, creating a diversified portfolio that is insulated from the volatility of any single sector or economy. Family limited partnerships allow wealthy families to transfer business interests to heirs at reduced tax valuations while maintaining centralized control, ensuring that the family's economic power remains concentrated even as ownership is technically distributed. Annual gifting strategies, using the gift tax exclusion, allow gradual wealth transfer that reduces the taxable estate while keeping assets within the family system. Private foundations and donor-advised funds provide tax-advantaged vehicles from philanthropy that also serve as training grounds for the next generation, teaching heirs how to deploy capital strategically while building social capital and public legitimacy. These are not isolated tactics but integrated systems, carefully designed and professionally managed by family offices that function as private investment firms with resources that rival major financial institutions. The largest family offices manage portfolios exceeding $10 billion, employing teams of lawyers, accountants, investment managers, and philanthropic advisors who work exclusively to preserve and grow the family's wealth across generations. The geographic distribution of wealth has become as strategic as the financial instruments that hold it, and the ultra-wealthy have learned from history that concentration in a single jurisdiction is a vulnerability that can be exploited by governments, economic crises, or social upheaval. The British Virgin Islands, the Cayman Islands, Bermuda, and Switzerland remain cornerstones of offshore wealth architecture, offering zero corporate tax, minimal reporting requirements, and legal structures that shield assets from creditors and taxation. Switzerland's banking system, though diminished by recent transparency initiatives and automatic exchange of financial information, continues to provide robust privacy protections alongside a stable political environment and strong legal framework that makes it optimal for asset protection. The Cayman Islands hosts no corporate tax, no income tax, no capital gains tax, and no withholding tax, creating an environment where wealth can grow unencumbered by the fiscal demands that constrain ordinary citizens. These jurisdictions are not merely tax shelters but fully developed financial ecosystems with sophisticated legal systems, professional services, and regulatory frameworks designed to accommodate the needs of billionaires who operate across multiple national boundaries. The strategy here mirrors the diversification principles that protected merchant families during the Age of Exploration, when Venetian and Genoese traders spread their holdings across multiple city-states to insulate themselves from local wars, plagues, and economic disruptions. The modern equivalent involves holding real estate in London, portfolio investments in Hong Kong, offshore trusts in the British Virgin Islands, and operational businesses in the United States, creating a web of assets that cannot be easily seized, taxed, or devalued by any single government. Hong Kong has emerged as a leading offshore center, stabilizing its position by attracting all categories of offshore financial wealth. And this reflects a broader reorganization in the offshore world as it adapts to increasing financial transparency standards. The data suggests that while offshore deposits have declined on average, portfolio investments hidden in prominent offshore centers have actually increased, indicating that wealthy clients are using more sophisticated methods of tax avoidance that are less vulnerable to current global transparency initiatives. Artificial intelligence represents the most significant wealth creation and wealth preservation technology since the Industrial Revolution, and billionaires are investing in it with the understanding that control over AI infrastructure will determine economic dominance for the next century. A surge of multi-billion-dollar AI infrastructure deals has enriched tech elites by hundreds of billions of dollars, reshaping global finance even as questions grow about the sustainability of current valuations. Warren Buffett, Philippe Lafonte, and Ken Griffin continue to increase their positions in Alphabet and Meta platforms, recognizing that these companies are not merely technology firms but foundational infrastructure for the Arabian economy. Alphabet's revenue recently surpassed $100 billion in a single quarter for the first time, with its cloud unit carrying a backlog of over $150 billion from customers, demonstrating that AI is not speculative but already generating enormous cash flows. Meta Platforms has invested heavily in AI to strengthen its core advertising business, and billionaire Ken Griffin increased his stake in the company dramatically, moving from no exposure to nearly 2 million shares. The global AI market is projected to reach several $1 trillion within the next decade, representing not just a business opportunity but a strategic imperative for anyone attempting to preserve wealth. Across the century, control over AI infrastructure means control over data, and control over data means control over the economy itself. The families and institutions that own AI infrastructure will wield influence comparable to those who controlled railroads in the 19th century or oil in the 20th, extracting rents from nearly every economic transaction in the digital economy. If you are finding this documentary valuable, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell so you do not miss future episodes exploring the hidden mechanisms of wealth and power. Comment below and let me know where you are watching from, your city and country, because I am genuinely curious to see the global reach of this analysis and to understand how these patterns play out in different parts of the world. Space represents the ultimate frontier for wealth that seeks to transcend terrestrial constraints, and billionaires are investing in asteroid mining, satellite infrastructure, and off-world industries with the explicit goal of creating economic systems that cannot be regulated or taxed by any existing government. Asteroid mining could reach billions of dollars in value within the next 2 decades, and a single asteroid could contain tens of billions of dollars worth of platinum, demonstrating the immense wealth potential of extraterrestrial resources. Recently, the California-based company Astroforge launched its Odin spacecraft aboard a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket, aiming to target an asteroid to trial mining technologies, an essential step toward commercial asteroid mining. Even though communication issues occurred after launch, Larry Page, Eric Schmidt, Ross Perot Jr., and Charles Simonyi, each worth over $1 billion, are backing Planetary Resources, an asteroid mining venture seeking to extract water and metals from near-Earth asteroids. These are not vanity projects but calculated investments in infrastructure beyond the reach of terrestrial governments, creating a new class of assets that exist in international space rather than within any nation's jurisdiction. The logic mirrors that of European explorers who ventured to the Americas. Access to resources beyond the control of existing sovereigns and the opportunity to construct new legal and economic structures free from old-world taxation and regulation. Space ventures also offer technological breakthroughs with far-reaching applications, including satellite networks for global communications, Earth observation systems that provide strategic intelligence, and launch infrastructure that may one day support off-world manufacturing and habitation. Those who control this infrastructure will possess strategic advantages comparable to those enjoyed by powerful trading companies of the past, which operated with sovereign-like authority. Longevity research and biotech investments represent another dimension of the 100-year plan, one that seeks not merely to preserve wealth across generations, but to extend the lifespan of the wealth creators themselves. Ultra-wealthy individuals have invested billions into longevity ventures, backing biotech startups targeting lifespan extension despite the formidable obstacles facing anti-aging technologies. Average funding rounds for companies researching lifespan extension have increased dramatically, reaching tens of millions of dollars per round. Executives, political leaders, and technologists are taking this field seriously. High-profile investors have poured personal fortunes into experimental longevity technologies and biological research. Some national leaders have even expressed interest in longevity-enhancing medical strategies, signaling that this is not merely a private fascination but a matter of geopolitical importance. Scientific studies show that investing in delaying aging could have significantly greater impacts on life expectancy than treating individual diseases, which has further fueled capital flowing into the sector. If such technology succeeds, it could upend the very concept of generational wealth by keeping control in the hands of the original wealth creators for a century or more, effectively bypassing the need for dynastic succession. Climate change presents one of the greatest systemic risks to long-term wealth preservation, and the ultra-wealthy are preparing accordingly. Reports emphasize that businesses must prepare for both high-temperature scenarios and accelerated decarbonization, recognizing that either outcome will require dramatic shifts in capital allocation and strategy. While the wealthiest face lower immediate risks, their long-term exposure is increasing, particularly through supply chain vulnerabilities and systemic economic impacts. Wealth holders are responding by investing in mitigation technologies such as renewables, carbon capture, and geoengineering, while simultaneously preparing for failure scenarios via land purchases in climate-stable regions, secure compounds, and the development of self-sufficient communities capable of withstanding global disruptions. This dual strategy reflects the recognition that climate change could undermine the economic foundations upon which all 100-year plans rely. Decentralized finance and blockchain technology provide another tool for long-term wealth preservation, one that removes assets from the direct control of governments and traditional financial institutions. DeFi uses blockchain technology to create open, permissionless financial systems that eliminate intermediaries, reduce costs, and increase transparency. Tokenized assets have exploded in value over a short period, including tokenized treasury funds and institutional-scale blockchain-backed financial products, signaling that adoption is accelerating. Tokenization offers liquidity for illiquid assets, fractional ownership, financial inclusion, and greater efficiency through near-instant settlement. However, DeFi also reveals familiar patterns of wealth concentration. Those with the greatest resources often dominate governance and extract the greatest benefits, reproducing traditional financial hierarchies under a new technological banner. For the ultra-wealthy, this is not a drawback but yet another mechanism to preserve and grow power over time.